Good evening, folks. Gary Popovich here. I write Pop Substack, My Life in a Golf Shirt. Tonight, I'm very happy to have an old friend and someone who can give us some insights into the Ryder Cup, which is coming up in a couple of weeks. Brian Robin. Brian writes for the iGamingPlayer.com. He specializes in golf, football, and horse racing. He also writes for the California section of the USGA. And currently, tell us what's going on with you now, Brian. I found this interesting.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you guys for listening and following this, and I hope you guys enjoy what we got in store for you. Currently, I've gone for the last 2 years. I have been the media and public relations director for South Coast Repertory Theater, which is one of the largest regional theaters in the United States. If you picture Broadway and kind of off Broadway as like the major leagues, we would be basically AAA in the theater world. And after working in sports as a writer for 17 years and working in sports PR, promoting golf tournaments and horse racing for another 13, it's a really, really good break, and I'm really enjoying it. At this point in my life, to work in nonprofit and work for a great theater, it appeals to me on a lot of ways. And so while I'm doing that, I, of course, am still paying attention to golf. Gary's wonderful blog helps with that. I keep up a lot with the game by reading him, and I'm still paying attention to what's going on. And obviously with the Ryder Cup coming up, which is one of the seminal events in golf, I've been paying a lot of attention to it. So hopefully you will be able to enjoy what Gary and I have in store for you as we break down one of the events in golf that is absolutely must-see TV.
It is, Brian. In fact, after the majors, and some would even argue that it's on a par with the majors as far as its importance in the world of golf, and particularly I'd say in the last 20 to 25 years, it's really come into its own as an exciting golf event. I should also mention too, before we get too deep into this, that if you ever have any questions about Cal State Fullerton athletics, Brian can fill you in on that. I know they had a wonderful baseball team. And I also know that they've not lost a football game since 1994, I believe, because that's when they dropped football.
1993, but you're in the same ballpark. Yeah, we're undefeated in football since 1993. So,
well,
I something we take
because I can go back to 1960 with Marquette.
You do have that, yes. You guys have a longer unbeaten skein than we do, which is great. Anyway. And like we're good in baseball. Our basketball team lately has actually been rather decent. We've gone to 2 tournaments in the last 5 years, which
nice
for us, unlike the basketball powerhouse that Marquette is, us going to 2 tournaments within 5 years has pretty much stopped the presses around the lovely campus of Cal State Fullerton. So we take our victories where we find them.
Well, unfortunately for us, we're kind of in that same boat these days. Although with Shaka Smart on board now, we have a little bit of hope. Anyway, let's get to the topic at hand, that being the Ryder Cup. And I know that a lot of folks tuning in, I know a lot of folks that read my blog aren't necessarily golf aficionados. For some reason, they seem to like to read the blog despite that. But anyway, Brian, let's just talk a brief, let's keep it brief, but just, a little bit of a history about the Ryder Cup and how it became an important event.
It started in 1927. There was a wealthy seed merchant in England named Samuel Ryder, who for whatever reason decided, it'd be a really good idea for the Americans and people in Great Britain and Ireland to play these biennial matches that are like team matches, where you take individual players that are used to playing as lone wolves and individuals, you put them on a team, you have them play for their country, and you see what comes of it. And Ryder put up the money for the event. He put up the money for the trophy, as you've probably seen, the trophy that everybody holds when they win the thing. And in 1927, it started. And what was interesting is that the Americans and Great Britain split the first four. It was 2-2 going in after the first four events, and then it got ugly, and it got ugly in a hurry. The U.S. won the next seven. Europe somehow managed to steal the 1957 event, which was their last great act of defiance for the next 13 events. And keep in mind, these events happened every other year. So every odd-numbered year, there would be a Ryder Cup, and basically every odd-numbered year from 1959 until roughly 1983, I believe it was, 1985, the Americans dominated. They won 12 of the next 13. And the one event they didn't win was 1969, but they tied it. And under the rules of the Ryder Cup, if there is a tie in the event, the holder of the cup keeps the cup. And I should probably go back at this point, and we should probably define how the Ryder Cup works. You have what's known as match play events, and the first 2 days are pairs where there's two golfers playing for each side. And if they're playing, say, alternate shot, there's two different formats. Alternate shot, where one player hits and then another player hits, and they alternate shots until the ball's in the hole. And say if Brian and Gary are playing, say, two other golfers named Ryan and Julian, just to pick two names out of the hat, one of which being my roommate. If Brian and Gary win the hole, we get a point. And if it's tied, we go to the next. It keeps going until somebody wins a point. And they play two different formats of this. They play what I said, alternate shot, and then they play what's known as four ball, which is I play my ball, Gary plays his ball, Ryan and Julian play their balls, and whoever has the best score wins the hole for that team.
Right.
And then you play 2 days of that, Fridays and Saturdays, and then Sundays singles, where there's 12 matches that go off alternating, throughout the day. And that's usually where things are decided, is the Sunday singles. So if Brian and Gary defeat Ryan and Julian over 18 holes or however long it takes, we get a point. And the goal is to get 14.5 points, because that clinches the cup for you. There's 28 matches, you have to get 14.5 points. So that's how the event is decided.
Right. Or if you're defending, if the defending team gets 14 points,
yes,
results in a tie, then they retain the cup.
Then they keep the cup, which is what happened in 1969. But let's get back to kind of the initial U.S. dominance of this. Starting in 1985, Europe basically flipped the script. They won for the first time since 1932 or 1957, excuse me, in 1985. And then they proceeded to win 3 of the next 5. And then the Americans managed to win 3 of those during the 90s. But then since the turn of the century, it's basically been a European romp. They've won 7 of the 10 this century. Right. Which, I mean, you could write books, and they have written books about it. But everybody's tried to figure out why the Europeans have such an advantage, since the turn of the century. A big reason for that, and this goes back to 1983, which was the last year the Americans won, and that basically the sunset of their dominance, is they've won 55% of the 4-ball matches and 52% of the alternate shot. So when it comes to strategy and tactics, the Europeans have it all over us for whatever reason. There's all these theories and stuff, and you can speak a lot on this yourself, that they're better in the team room, and they've got better camaraderie, and the Americans are used to playing as lone wolves, and they're not used to playing as a team, and they've run out every type of idea imaginable, and they haven't been able to solve the puzzle.
Yeah, that's a excellent point, Brian. And part of it too is that over the years, I think it's a combination of two things. Number one, there's a huge chip on the European collective shoulder, if you will. Uh, you know, being tired
Yeah.
of hearing about, how great American golfers are. But I think even more so is the fact that there's been tremendous continuity in the team, not just in the guys who played it, but also in the way that the team is managed and captained. There's always there has always been a succession plan where vice captains move up into the captaincy. There's always some type of veteran leadership around the European team, where until recently, I would say that's not been the case with the U.S. team. That there's been an attempt to change that,
Yeah.
but I think this year we're really into kind of a transitional time for both teams, and we'll get into that as we start to talk about the upcoming matches. Now, Brian, as you know, the last time the U.S. has actually won 2 of the last 3 cups.
They have.
Although both of them have been on U.S. soil, they've not won over in Europe since 1993, I believe it is.
That is correct. 93 team
Right.
was the last team to win on European soil.
Right.
We have lost in England, we have lost in Ireland, we have lost in Wales, we have lost in Spain, we have lost in France.
Right.
I mean,
Now
it's a
Italy's
veritable United States. What's that?
Now it's Italy's turn.
Yeah, now it's Italy's turn to join the hit parade, and we'll get into that. We'll get into that later on. But I mean, we've lost in a veritable European Union of countries,
Mhm.
and a lot of times it hasn't been close. Which, I mean, we've won 2 of the last 6 and 3 of the last 10. I mean, it's a lot of it you can dial into what we were just talking about. But there was a seminal event that happened in 1979, and Jack Nicklaus was one of the impetus factors for turning the seminal event loose. In 1979, for the first time, they invited players from continental Europe to be on the Great Britain and Ireland team. So it went from Great Britain and Ireland to Europe. And what that did is that opened the door for the likes of Seve Ballesteros and Bernhard Langer, and then later on, Jose Maria Olazabal, Sergio Garcia, Francesco Molinari, Henrik Stenson, et al. Mm-hmm. And where that has become absolutely crucial is you look at the pairing of Seve and Olazabal, and it's the greatest pairing in Ryder Cup history. Those 2 together were 11-2-2. Mm-hmm. And on top of the fact that, Seve was just such a talisman for the European team for as long as he was involved with it. And then you have Langer, and then you have, Garcia, who we'll get to in a moment, but Garcia has 28.5 Ryder Cup points. He has more Ryder Cup points than any player in the history of the event. So when you open that up to Europe, this is the kind of golfing talent you brought in.
Right.
You brought in players like this that were going to basically be, mainstays for a generation and a generation plus of this event.
Well, Seve was really kind of the key, don't you think?
He was. He absolutely was, because he lived for this event. I mean, yeah. And his aura and his personality permeated through every team room he was in, and then you pair that with the players that he mentored, like Garcia and Olazabal, and then you get other players like Langer coming in, who was just a dynamic factor in this. I mean, right. There's no way to overestimate how important that event was in 1979.
No. There's one other player, since we're kind of running down the European stars, if you will, and he's a guy that you love to hate, but you wish you had him on your side, and that's Ian Poulter.
Oh, I forgot about Poulter. Yeah, that's a great call.
Ian Poulter could die tomorrow. You could put him in a casket for 30 years, and you could open it up, and he'd come out charging and probably win you a point or two in that year's Ryder Cup. He was just and we'll get to that in a second because, let's get in a little bit about the makeup of the two teams, and particularly how it's changed since 2021. Now, again, the last time around, the U.S. Won quite handily, and at the time, it seemed like we could be ushering in a new era of, if not American dominance, at least tipping the scales toward that side. That was a very young team. I think Dustin Johnson was a real veteran of the team at age 34 or 35, I guess.
Yeah, it was a very young team.
But they, the cup was essentially over by the end of the second day.
Yeah.
Although the aforementioned Mr. Poulter did win his singles match and maintained his undefeated record there. But things have kind of changed since then, with the advent of the Live Tour, which impacted both of the teams. But let's take a look at both of the teams, and Brian, why don't you talk a little bit about the U.S. team? And
before I do that, Gary, let's go back a touch to what we were talking about at Whistling Straits. Like you said, the Americans got an 11-5 lead after 2 days. They eventually won 19-9,
right,
which is the largest win in the modern era of the Ryder Cup. So if you're going back, say maybe to like the early 80s, when this event really became the event that we know it is today, this was the biggest boat race of all. Stricker came out afterward, Steve Stricker, the captain of that team, and said it was the greatest team of all time. I think the 1981 team would like a word, because that's a team that had the likes of Ray Floyd, Tom Kite, Tom Watson, Lee Trevino, Ben Crenshaw, Larry Nelson, Johnny Miller, Hale Irwin, Jerry Pate, Bill Rogers, Bruce Litsky, and some guy named Nicholas. 9 of those 12 players are in the World Golf Hall of Fame, and all but Rogers and Litsky won majors.
right.
I mean, they won 18.5 to 9.5. And I mean, I would be hard pressed to pick a better team than the names I just read off.
That is a murderer's row. I mean, even taking a guy like Bruce Litsky, who was probably, got them, if he had ever taken the game really seriously, he probably would have been a major winner and Hall of Famer.
He would have won probably 3 or 4 majors easily.
Yeah. The story about Bruce Litsky is that when his season ended, his caddy put a banana in his golf bag at the end of the season, because Litsky would tell me, I'm not going to play more golf again until February or March. So when they got back together, the caddy opened up the bag. The banana, now a rotten banana, was still in his bag. But that's the kind of talent he had. He could just go out and he could always hit that high fade shot. And it was
very, very underrated golfer.
Yeah.
And I mean, he belonged, the names I read off, he belonged on that team.
Absolutely.
I mean, from a talent standpoint, there's no question.
You consider that he's the number 12 guy, basically,
Yeah. If he's your number 12 guy, I like your chances a lot.
But so I'm going to use this as an intro into the discussion about the U.S. team. Now, the last Ryder Cup, you might recall there was some controversy as to like who the back end picks was going to be. Patrick Reed was actually inside the top 12 as far as qualifying for the team if they want to pick him, but they don't. Patrick Reed's nickname is not Table for One for nothing. Nobody really wants to play with him.
You really don't want me to start talking about Patrick Reed right now.
But we'll. But Scotty Scheffler was the choice, and one of the main reasons. Well, there's 2 reasons. Number one, he was playing well, but number 2, he was the one guy. Bryson DeChambeau had qualified for the team. Bryson, not exactly the most popular locker room guy. they asked Scotty, "You'd be willing to play with Bryson?" And Scotty says, "Sure." So that's basically how he got on the team. Now he's the number one player on the team, arguably. Um, and
Yeah.
and well, let's go from there.
When you look at Zach Johnson's picks and approach,
Mhm.
Zach being the captain of the U.S. team, and by let's do a quick little primer on captains. The PGA of America, which runs the Ryder Cup,
Right.
um, they are in charge of picking the captains for the U.S. team. And typically, what they do is they will pick a major winner who's usually in his late to mid 40s or early 50s at the oldest.
Mhm.
Um, and that will be the captain of the team. And they usually pick them, a couple of years, 18 months to a couple of years in advance. And you can kind of see where they're going each time when they pick a team, except for this year. This was probably supposed to be Phil Mickelson's team to captain. And we'll get into the live element in a moment, but when he went to live and basically he basically burned, well, he didn't burn, he napalmed his bridge to the PGA of America and cost himself the Ryder Cup captaincy. So they went to plan B being Zach Johnson, a two-time major winner, somebody everybody gets along with, a very safe, very, nondescript. I hate nondescript is probably not the right word. A very safe pick. But when you look at Zach Johnson's pick and his approach to going into the Ryder Cup, it's so Zach Johnson. He's about as anti-drama and pro-business, buttoned-up business as any player on the tour. Zach's not the most charismatic guy in the world, but he's friendly, he's easygoing, he's intelligent, he's basically everything the PGA of America looks for in a captain. He's not going to say anything stupid. He's not going to do anything stupid. He's not a wild card. He's safe. He's buttoned up. He's intelligent. He's got a couple of majors in the bank. Everything that Zach Johnson came out when you look at his picks. He is the Joe Friday from Dragnet of captains. That's the best way I can describe him. When he announced the picks, it took all of 10 minutes to announce them. And then he fielded questions. And he basically, his attitude was, here's my picks. I'm not going to split the atom trying to define why I picked these people. You can split the atom yourself. I'm going to give you a brief reason why I picked them. And then you can go off and split the atom and parse it all you want.
And isn't that, excuse me for interrupting, but isn't that such a refreshing change from past years when we've made this drama about who the final captain's pick was going to be? I remember at Hazeltine, I think it was Ryan Moore who was the final pick, but they held off until the very last. Well, of course, then you had a very short layoff for the U.S. team between the tour ending and then going to the Ryder Cup. But it was this grandiose announcement, and it's just good to see that business-like approach.
It's good to see it. But here's the thing: and I'm going to touch on this. These picks are always some of the most interesting parts of the Ryder Cup, because you're looking at who got picked, and often, in fact, more than often, you're looking at B, who didn't get picked. And there's always intrigue in who didn't get picked. I think there's probably more intrigue on the European side, which you'll talk about, than there is on our side. Because I think Johnson did a pretty darn good job with his picks. I think there's only really one that I would have maybe gone with rather than another. And it's not the one that everybody's talking about, just taking Sam Burns ahead of Cameron Young. Zach's approach here makes perfect sense when you look at both of those players and what their strengths and weaknesses are. Burns is a much better putter. Young is better from tee to green, and he's better in the big events. But the difference is Young is 145th on tour in strokes gained putting.
Mm.
And as we have seen over the years, when you're 145th in strokes gained putting, you're fighting a howitzer packing historic record with a pop gun. We have seen time and time again how important putting is in this event. And what the reason that Burns was taken, the underlying reason wasn't as much his putter, although it certainly was the fact that he's a natural pairing with Scheffler. He and Scheffler play together really well, and they're friends, and it's the perfect pairing for Scheffler, especially when you consider, Scheffler's impeccable ball striking. He's probably one of the best ball strikers in the world, as the numbers go. But as we have seen, his putting lately has been probably C plus to B minus, and there are periods of time over the summer that C plus would be generous.
Very generous.
So when we see what this team is and we look at the picks, it makes perfect sense to put Sam Burns on this team. As far as snubs go, I mean, the obvious snub is DJ, because everyone looks back at what he was at Whistling Straits. He was 5-0 at Whistling Straits and just completely blowing everyone off the map. Well, that makes perfect sense because DJ has always played Whistling Straits well. If he had, been a little bit sharper upstairs between the ears, he'd have won the 2010 PGA instead of spitting it up with a penalty in the hazard on the 18th hole. So it's a course he's very good on. But even if you put aside the live factor, Mr. Gretzky was 7-9 going into that event. In fact, he was 2-9 in Europe. So Whistling Straits made him 12-9, and it covered up a lot of gaps that I don't know if any other course would have covered up for him.
Well, I was just going to say that the other thing with DJ being Dustin Johnson for the uninitiated, the other thing, and you can say that about most of the live golfers, because again, Mickelson was campaigning for a few of them, but the Koepka pick, totally justified, totally understandable.
Absolutely.
DJ did not, all Zach could really go on really was, his performance in the majors, and he was a non-factor in all four of them.
Very pedestrian in all of them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and and this is, not to go off on a diatribe. I'm not going to, but just the fact that there's very poor visibility into the live tour. The events are different, and it would be very, very difficult, I think, to justify any other live golfer besides Brooks Koepka.
The only other one you could make a remote case from, and I was just about to get into him, is DeChambeau. And I say that because he is a phenomenal driver of the golf ball. And he has toned down his, for lack of a better term, douchebag mentality and personality over the years. He's actually approachable now, whereas 3, 4, 5 years ago he was radioactive.
Right.
But there's still the chemistry issues, and as you astutely pointed out, Gary, leaving him off the team, that's not a big. It's not a big issue. It's not something that's like, oh God, he should be on the team. Could you make a case for him? Yeah. Could you make a case that he shouldn't be? Absolutely. And I agree with you in terms of that Koepka was the only live golfer that made any kind of a case whatsoever of being on this team. And and when you look at Koepka's personality, he fits in with the rest of these guys. And so there isn't going to be a chemistry issue with him. No. I mean, they've kind of, with him, they've kind of gotten over the whole live thing with him. They haven't with a lot of the other golfers, but I mean, a lot of the mainstay golfers don't hold it against Brooks as much as they hold it against the other guys for whatever reason. Maybe it's because Brooks is Brooks.
Well, that's part of it. I think, part of it too was the fact that during that time, he was coming off another injury. He was really in kind of a bad mental state, and live. I think with a lot of guys that went over there, actually, they were at certain crossroads of their careers. Ian Poulter has a whole separate house for his automobiles, and his game was declining. So
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
but aside from all that, Brooks is Brooks Koepka's not to be a little cliche on you, but he's a competitor. He's the guys that play with him, who've played with him over the years, know that he's a tough competitor, particularly in big events. This is a big event, so I think
Yes.
I think he's fine. The obvious one, I think, that a lot of people have been, that you alluded to, I think you're talking about Justin Thomas, right?
We're going to get to Thomas in a moment.
Okay.
But I wanted to point out one other element about when we're talking snubs. The one snub that I think you could make a case for, and a very credible case for, of why was he left off this team, was Keegan Bradley. He's 21st in putting on tour. And as we have noted, this team needs putters. And when you have Scheffler, Justin Thomas, and Colin Morikawa, all three of whom have been battling the flat stick for most of this year, you can't have too many guys that can sink putts.
Right.
The problem with Keegan Bradley was he only had one top 10 in a full field event, and it happened to be the Travelers, the event in Hartford, Connecticut, which he ended up winning.
Right.
That's probably what sunk his chances of being on this team. But I mean, as far as snubs go, that's the only one that I would pick nits for, and I can see why he's not there. So as I said, I think Johnson did an amazing job picking this team. I think he did a pretty credible job. He's got built-in pairings with Burns and Scheffler. Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele have played together before, and they play together really well. Their games and personalities complement each other all the way down the line. You got Koepka, Ricky Fowler, Colin Morikawa, and Brian Harman, who can pretty much play with anybody. So you've got those guys that you could plug and play with anybody. And I would really like to see Koepka and Harman play together. I think those two together would be dynamite. So, and then you have where we're going to go next. You have Jordan Spieth and Justin Thomas, which brings us to the 1,200-pound gorilla in the room, which is Justin Thomas's presence on this team. This is where Zach Johnson caught all kinds of flack, because Thomas, for most of this year, was a non-factor. He missed the cut in 3 of 4 of the majors, and he finished 65th in the one he didn't miss the cut in. This is a big matzo ball for Zach Johnson to bite off. He was 71st on the FedEx Cup standings. His form most of this year was not very good. But when Johnson announced the picks, everybody's eyes went open, and of course those were where most of the questions went. And he came right out and said, "You do not leave JT off this team." Okay. Hopefully, for Johnson's sake, for the Americans' sake, you leave his 2023 form back in the United States. Because here's the thing with Johnson. Yes, he plays very well with Spieth. The two of them are best friends. They hang out together a lot. They're very good together. Their games complement each other. Their personalities complement each other. It's a natural selection, if you've got Jordan Spieth on this team, to put him there. And Johnson does make a lot of birdies. He gets on rolls, and he can, string out 5 birdies in 7 holes, shorter time than it takes for you and I to finish this podcast. That said, this is, again, the limb and the hill that Zach Johnson's going to die on if it blows up in his face. He'll end up taking his place in the Ryder Cup roster of captains of infamy, along with the likes of Lanny Watkins and Hal Sutton and Jim Furyk, all of whom have taken, shots over the years for the way their picks went and the way that they managed the team. It's where Johnson will get criticized, because I don't think he, all of his other picks, I don't think deserve any criticism. I think he picked a very good team.
And
as I said,
I'll add too that in the event this week, I don't know how he finished, but
he contended.
Thomas was tied for second going into this final round. I didn't get a chance to watch it today, but so you know, it could be a boot in the butt for him. Particularly
It could be.
finishing
It,
outside of the top 70 now. You have to kind of prove your mettle in this fall tour, and it could be. I've also read too that JT's going to seek some additional swing and putting advice outside. His dad, who's
yes.
PGA pros, he's been his coach his entire life, and I think I think it may be time for him to seek some other viewpoints on his game.
Point.
So on the European side, and the old guard is gone. Either
Yes.
they're and I'm talking about guys. And sorry for having to go to my notes here because I turned 70 last month and my memory's not what it used to be. But Stenson, Garcia, Graham McDowell, Poulter, Paul Casey, all will not be playing this time around. Now, again, a lot of these guys were sort of fading, but they did provide on Lee Westwood. How could I forget Westwood? That these are guys who, part of the, the mentoring process for the newer players. Now, having said that, your core, you got Rory, you got John Rahm, you got Victor Hovland, who's probably the hottest golfer on the planet right now. Terrell Hatton, who might be the new Ian Poulter for all we know, and Matt Fitzpatrick. That's a pretty good nucleus to start with.
And Justin Rose.
Justin Rose as a captain's pick, Tommy Fleetwood,
yeah,
Shane Lowry. So you've got some, you have some good veteran, experience on that team. The one snub on the European side was kind of interesting. A fellow named Adrian
Meronk.
Yeah. Who's not maybe that familiar to a lot of us, but he won 3 times on the European Tour, including the Italian Open, which is the site of the Ryder Cup this year. So that was an interesting omission, but who was picked ahead of him, it's kind of hard to argue against. We have Ludwig Aberg, who literally burst onto the European Tour, or the DP World Tour, we should be calling it. He's won out there. He's a rookie. Last 2 years, he's won the Ben Hogan Award as the best collegiate golfer at Texas Tech. And the other thing that I will point out is that all 12 of the guys that are on the Ryder Cup team, they all made the cut at the BMW championship at Wentworth, which is considered, if not a major, certainly a prestigious tournament on the DP World Tour. They all made the cut. The commissioner of the DP Tour made a point of telling us that after the tournament today, and as he put it, our boys are in form going into the Ryder Cup. I have to tell you, top to bottom, and again, what difference a couple of years make? Hovland was a rookie on the Ryder Cup 2 years ago and couldn't make a putt, outside of like 2 feet. He's gotten over that. As I say, he's been hot. He's a major winner waiting to happen.
Sooner rather than later.
Yeah, exactly.
I like the Aberg pick. I love the Aberg pick. He turned pro in June, and then won the European Masters, and he won it by throwing 4 birdies in his last 5 holes on the course.
Right.
He leads in strokes gained driving. He's averaging 317 yards off the tee. He has no fear of any pressure situation whatsoever. I mean, he won he won the European Masters, another prestigious event on the DP World Tour, in his 9th professional start. Run that through the mental Samsonite. That's how good this kid is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's going to be a force.
He is absolutely going to be a force. And I mean, to leave Moronk off the team, I mean, someone's going to get left off when you have that kind of depth. And I think the Europeans have more depth than we give them credit for.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that the Moronk would have been good on this course, aside from the fact that he won the Italian Open on it, is he's a straight driver of the ball. He hits up 63% of his fairways. And he picks up strokes on the field in every hole classification except long par threes, of which there are 2 on this course. But I mean, Aberg's upside and his ceiling is infinite.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you've got enough players, I mean, you got a Matt Fitzpatrick who hits fairways and scrambles his tush off. You can maybe blink and leave Moronk off this time around, based on what else is out there. And you know, we talk about Fitzpatrick. He's 0-5 in Ryder Cup games, but in matches. But again, he's the best scrambler on the planet. And wouldn't you want somebody who leads the PGA Tour in 3 scrambling categories on your team?
Right.
Especially when you play him, you know, you pair him with somebody like Aberg, or you pair him with somebody like Tyrell Hatton, who can be all over the map, and you wouldn't think twice about it. This is a really, really good team. It really is. And like you said about Hovland, he went 0-3-2 in his Ryder Cup debut. Again, he was A, putting terribly, and B, you know, a Ryder Cup rookie. And Ryder Cup rookies have mixed, especially on the road. If he was a Ryder Cup rookie in a European event, I think he would have done a lot better. But you throw him at Whistling Straits on that kind of a course, in that kind of an atmosphere, and yeah, he was deer meat headlights.
Yeah.
He's not going to be deer meat headlights this time, as we have noted.
Then the other interesting pick was Seb Straka, and I say that because from what I understand, he actually could have played for the American team. He lives in the States. He has an American mother. Now he would have had to start that process, you know, a lot earlier than now. But and when you hear him talk, you know, he's right out of the South. You know.
Yeah, he is.
But he's been a very consistent player over here in America, and you know, again, it's just a sign of their depth. I'm really looking forward to this Ryder Cup because I think the teams are about as evenly matched as you can get. You know, both in terms of talent, but also in terms of experience.
Yes.
You know, it's primarily because, you know, the old guard is gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about one of those members of the old guard, because I mean, the whole Sergio Garcia variable to this equation fascinates me. You have to look at his history in this event. I mean, he has definitely picked up the baton left by the late Seve Ballesteros and carried it a very long way. He has been in every Ryder Cup, Gary, since 1999, which was his first Ryder Cup at the Miracle at Brookline at the Country Club outside Boston. That was his first Ryder Cup. And he's been in every Ryder Cup since then, with the exception of 2010. And as I noted before, his 28.5 points are the most points garnered by any player in the history of this event, which goes back 96 years. That's a presence that I think, above all the immortal names you mentioned earlier, I think stands head and shoulders above all of it. And I read an interesting story in the Telegraph a couple days ago that Sergio agreed to pay his £100,000 fine that all DP World Tour players were fined for leaving that event, that tour, and going to live. And then they were fined another £100,000 for each event that they played in Live. So Sergio's fines for this were somewhere north of £700,000.
Mhm.
And there was a source that told the Telegraph that he came to the DP World Tour with an offer to pay the fines if they would let him on the Ryder Cup team. And Luke Donald came out and said, "I've never even considered it. He wasn't even on my radar." Even as John Rahm was coming out and saying it would be stupid not to have the greatest Ryder Cup player in the history of the event with that kind of experience on our team. And it should be noted that of the 9 points that the Europeans won at Whistling Straits 2 years ago, Rahm and Garcia were responsible for 3 of them. All that to be said, that this event is so important to Garcia that he made backdoor channels to people on the DP World Tour to try to get back in the good graces of it, and was willing to pay a pretty good amount of money to do it, and wasn't even considered for it.
That is interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about the venue, and then we can kind of make our predictions.
Absolutely.
So, again, our guy that you and I both admire, Jeff Shackelford, who's a golf historian, architect, can tell you, can give you the inside scoop on just about any golf course in the world. He returned recently from Marco Simone, which is a site outside of Rome. And the first thing he said is that in talking to the Italian people, most of them don't know what the Ryder Cup is. But beyond that, he thinks it's going to be a very good match play venue. We got a couple of drivable par fours, which I know are among your favorite golf holes.
Love me my drivable par fours.
I would really love them if I could drive them anymore, but no, but they holes like that, do make for match play particularly, exciting viewing and exciting for the players. It appears to be a good spectator course. It's not particularly long. He did comment that the rough is going to be pretty heavy, but I don't know how much of a factor that's going to be this time around. What are your thoughts?
I don't think it's going to be a factor either, and I'll get into what I think is going to be the factor in a moment. I think it's interesting that Jeff Shackelford, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, he's a friend of mine. I've worked with him in my past life extensively. He's written several books, and when it comes to golf architecture, is probably one of the world's most most intelligent and go-to authorities when it comes to the concept of golf architecture. Yep. He's designed a few courses of his own. He actually played a part in the redo of Los Angeles Country Club, right, which hosted the U.S. Open this year. Jeff was one of the consultants that helped redo the bunkers on that course to get it back into George Thomas's original concept and design. Jeff, when it comes to architecture, is pretty much one of the go-tos. His intel showed that it was a pretty straightforward course. Yep. It's not going to require, Bryson DeChambeau's physics degree, and it's not going to require the UC Berkeley educations of Colin Morikawa and Max Homa to figure it out. It's not tricked up too much. I mean, obviously, aside from growing the rough. But I think what a key factor is going to be here, one of the key factors, and there's 2 elements we need to bring into play here. Zach Johnson took 9 players over to Marco Simone about a month ago for a scouting trip. Mm. And the reason he did this was A, because the players really need to see this course and get a feel for it, and B, several years ago when the event was in Paris, the Americans didn't get a lot of practice rounds on it. And they came into the course not really being able to figure out, with the limited practice they did get, what the nuances of the course were. So Johnson took a group over, and they got familiar with the course. And I think it was a great idea on his part to do that. The second element, and getting back to what you said about how growing the rough isn't going to be a factor, what I think is going to be a factor on this course, and again, this course, a pretty good mix of holes. You've got The drivable par fours, as you mentioned, which probably you're looking at numbers 11 and 18. Although Shackelford was talking about how they were going to shorten the fifth from about 376 yards to about 300, which could make it drivable. But you've got 5 par fours longer than 450 yards, which you expect in an event like this. And there's a great mix of par fives. You got par fives ranging from 503 yards to the 18th, which is playing about 626. Great mix of holes. Yes, there's 2 long par threes, which I can't stand, as you know, as much as I love my drivable par fours. I think long par threes, when I'm talking about like longer than about 200 yards, I think they're the worst holes in golf. I don't think they're great from a design standpoint or from a strategy standpoint. There are 2 of those that are playing a little bit north of 200 yards, so hopefully, it won't be too big of a factor, and it won't be just hit and pray. That said, I think the element that's going to come into play here more than anything else is the speed of the greens. How is Luke Donald, the European Ryder Cup captain, going to set up the speed of the greens? Is he going to slow them down? Because what that does is the Americans are normally used to playing on pretty fast greens, that on the stimp meter, which is the device used to measure greens, stimp out at usually about 12 and a half to 13, which is very fast. I mean, a green that's like 13 is like basically, to give you an idea, basically putting on hardwood floor. So if you've got a green that's putting that fast, which is what the Americans are used to playing on a lot of the tour courses that they play on, they have very fast greens. Now, are they going to be that fast here? Or is Donald going to slow them down to try to mess with the Americans' heads and get them thinking, what do we do on these putts? We're normally used to putting on fast greens, but now these greens aren't very fast and we're leaving putts short. And you know from playing this game forever, and I know for playing this game for this side of forever, that when you screw with a player's brains on the greens, it really messes with their overall game. And I think what Donald does with the green speed is going to be everything in terms of course variables.
That's interesting. I would just say, as sort of a counterpoint to that, is that most of the European team plays on the PGA Tour. So a
lot of them do, yes.
So it could, now they do tend to play more different kinds of courses, because they will also play over Europe a lot more than, say, American players do. And that's been a point in the past, is that the European side is more adept at adjusting to different course conditions.
They absolutely are.
So it's a very good point. It'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. Well,
and I think you need to look at the par threes. One more point on that. I think you need to look at the par threes, because the par threes at Marcus Simone have some undulations to them. And if you're going to play these greens at 12 or 13, 12 and a half or 13, that's going to make those holes tricky.
Yeah. We'll see. I mean, this is going to be new for everybody, and
it is.
I'm really looking forward to it. As I say, I think this one's going to be really competitive.
I think it's a good test of golf. I really do. I like the variance in holes. I love the fact there's possibly 3 drivable par fours. There's a par 3 that plays only 145 yards. So these guys will be hitting wedges into it. You got a par 5 that plays over 600 yards. I love the variance and the straightforward elements of this course from a match play standpoint. I think it's a great call.
Well, with that in mind, it's prediction time, and I will go to my gambling expert first to give me his call on this.
Let's look at the odds first. Not surprisingly, the Americans are favored anywhere from -106 to -120. And what that means is if you're betting on the Americans at -106, you have to put $106 down to win 100. Or if it's up to -120, you have to put $120 down to win 100. Conversely, the Europeans are anywhere from +110 to +125 underdogs to bring the cup back to Europe. And that means If you're betting it at plus 110, you have to put $100 down and you'll win 110. Meaning if you put $100 down on the Europeans and they win, you'll get $210 back. You'll get the 110 plus your $100 wager. At plus 125 at some of the books that I saw, same thing. You're betting $100 to win 125. Now, there's an interesting bet here they have, which is called to hoist the trophy. And that puts a tie into the mix.
Right.
Meaning if the two teams are tied, the team that hoists the trophy, which in this case would be the United States, the odds on that are minus 130 to minus 165. So the odds go down, or go up, I should say. You'd have to bet $165 to win 100 if you're betting on the Americans at the largest total they have to hoist the trophy. Europe's odds are anywhere from plus 110 to plus 135, meaning bet 100 to win 110, bet 100 to win 135. That's what if the match is tied, that's where that comes in, where those odds come in. The first odds we were talking about basically deal with who wins the cup.
Oh, yeah.
Individually, yes, you can bet individually on who's going to be the top point getter. Right now, the odds I saw have Scotty Scheffler and John Rahm as the favorites for top point getter, anywhere from plus 750 or 7.5 to 1 to plus 1100, and it varies on several of the books. Scheffler is the overall favorite to be the top point getter. And by plus 7, if you bet on him at plus 750, you bet $100 to win 750. The same thing with plus 1100. That said, I think if you're going to bet on this, I love betting on Victor Hovland as the top point getter at plus 1200, which means you're getting 12 to 1 that he will be the top point getter. I think from a value standpoint, that's a phenomenal bet. And if you get really deep into the weeds, which we're not going to here, there's all kinds of other prop bets that you can make, like who's going to lead after the first day, who's going to win their singles matches, who's going to be the low point total. There's some of these books. There's literally 100 bets you can make on this event. We're not going to get that deep in the weeds. All you need to know is the Americans are favored from moderate, almost a coin flip, to basically about 6 to 5.
Who do you think?
And Europe is roughly, in the same boat. And there's some good values there from an individual standpoint. So we'll leave it at that from a betting standpoint.
Who's your pick to win?
I'm going to. I love this European team. I'm going to bet on the Europeans. I think you never can go broke. I had a friend of mine once tell me, actually, when we were watching the Ryder Cup when it was in Paris, and the Americans were once again throwing up all over themselves. You could never go broke betting on the Europeans in Europe. And I know eventually all good things must come to an end, and it very well could here. But one of the things I like about the European tour, about the European team, is there are always, there are always players that you and I may have heard of because we're golf geeks, but that the average American golf fan has never heard of, that get into a Ryder Cup event and all of a sudden forget who they are and they become unconscious.
Right.
We've seen it time and time again. And I think there are sleepers on this team, like Robert McIntyre, who actually earned his place on this team, believe it or not.
Should have won his
Yeah, he's Scottish. We last saw him getting beat by Rory in the Scottish Open when Rory birdied the last 4 holes to beat him.
By the way, just to throw this in, the Scottish Open might have been the most fun tournament to watch this year.
Oh,
only
it
because
really
the wind was blowing 40 miles an hour on that course, and some of the shots that these guys were managing in those conditions was just phenomenal to watch. Sorry.
And you watch Rory be Rory, which is never a bad thing to see, which
Right.
never gets old. I mean, he birdies the last 4 holes to basically snatch and grab the title for McIntyre. And McIntyre was in with like a 64, I believe.
And he played terrific golf,
And he played great golf. There's always a Robert McIntyre for the European team. Yeah. I mean, Aberg is a great call for this. Shane Lowry, who is a great match player, player, although he didn't show it at Whistling Straits. He lives for events like this.
Mhm.
He could be the next Ian Poulter, only a lot easier to get along with and a lot easier to stomach if you're an American, because he gets into events like this. He rises to the big events. He plays well in the big events, and this is right in his wheelhouse.
Yeah.
If it wasn't for Liv, I'd probably be a lot more optimistic about the Americans' chances here.
Mhm.
But once again, that's that's hovering over everything as we know in golf. And I think the Europeans find a way to steal this. I really do.
I'm going to agree with your analysis. However, I'm going to give you the case for the U.S. team. And the case for the U.S. team is just simply a lot of the guys who were involved in the past failures over in Europe aren't around anymore. They don't have that hanging over their heads, much like at the last Ryder Cup for the U.S. team. It was a young team, a new team, and they didn't want to hear about the past. They felt like that they had a team that could go out and win. So from a just strictly from you know, let me put it this way: I'll probably put a quid on the Europeans, but you know. A U.S. victory would not surprise me just based on what I just said. I think these guys are a little less tied to the past. They're not, they haven't had that yoke of failure, standing over.
That's a great point. They did purge that generation of players who just, I love Jim Furyk as a player. I love him as a person. I've worked with him before. But he was basically emblematic of that generation that just could not get out of its own way in a Ryder Cup. And his record shows it. If you look his record up,
Yeah,
it's
well,
nothing.
if you look
It's
at
nothing.
most of those guys from those years, none of them had particularly good records.
No,
Not
they
even
didn't.
Tiger Woods, for that matter.
No, they didn't. And your point is very well taken. And I don't. And I liked Zach Johnson as a captain. I mean, yeah, I called him, the Joe Friday of captains, but that's not an insult. I mean, what you see is what you get with him, and I think that's going to really play well in that team room. And I'll say this: I like the fact that he basically told Netflix, in being Zach Johnson in a kind way, to go pound sand that they were not going
They're
to
not
be able
coming
to
in the
take the
team
full
room.
swing documentary into the American team room. I don't think they need that right now. As
No.
much as I love that full swing documentary in a lot of ways,
Oh,
I think
and they'll have
you and
plenty
I
to
could
talk
do
about
you and I
this.
could do you and I could do a document. We could do a podcast just on that, and we
Yeah.
probably
Well,
should. But I liked watching it. I really don't think it belonged in this team room for obvious reasons.
and they're going to have plenty to talk about this season anyway.
Absolutely.
That documentary. So that's not going to be anything a huge miss for them. I don't think. Look,
No.
I think we've covered this well. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh,
Glad to
Gary,
hear
it's a
about your,
pleasure as always.
yeah. Well, and obviously, and I do read about your new venture, and it sounds like that's going full speed ahead. Um, but folks, yeah, if you see, look for Brian's gambling writing and his writing in the for the California USGA. He gets some really good angles on some guys you may not have heard about, but you'll want to after you read Brian's stuff.
I appreciate that, Gary, and I appreciate this opportunity to chat with you on this. This was a blast, and I miss doing it with you. We did some work several years ago, and I had the time of my life doing it, and
Well, we'll do
look
some
forward to
more.
doing these again.
Well, we'll get together again after the Ryder Cup to do a little bit of post-mortem there. And coming into the new season, I definitely want to have you on to talk about the majors when they come up. And let's see what happens. I was talking to somebody the other day regarding Liv, and my suspicion after the Ryder Cup, one of two things is going to happen. There's either going to be a major announcement regarding Liv, or we're not going to know anything else, than what we already know, because it's been such a mess. But I'm thinking there's going to be some kind of announcement.
I hope you're right, because
Well, let me put
it,
it this way. Jay Monahan lives in my town here, Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and we did have thoughts of putting a Saudi Arabian flag on his front yard, but we resisted the temptation. Um, and I don't think Vern Lundquist, who is his neighbor up here, I don't think Vern would have liked it. We all like Vern; he's a good guy. So, yeah.
I worked with Jay Monahan in my past life. He was the former tournament director for the Deutsche Bank Championship outside of Boston.
Right. Yeah.
And I worked with dozens of tournament directors in my 13 years doing golf PR and running media centers. And Jay was probably, if not the sharpest, most astute tournament director, no worse than third. A very, very, very good executive. And you could tell even then he was destined for bigger things, which is why I was completely shocked to see how badly he dropped the ball on this whole thing. Now, we can get into this later,
Yeah,
but
let's do this another time. But
yeah, we'll do this
I
another
know
time.
what
But
you're
Jay is it really boggled my mind how this all played out, and your guess is as good as mine as where this is going to go, because I can't even guess. I can't even make an educated guess. I really have no idea. I really don't.
Well, welcome to the club.
Yeah.
All right, buddy. Well, listen, thanks again.
Hey,
Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you the next time.
we will, and thanks to you, Gary, and thanks to everybody watching this. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I hope we made some sense for you, and we could at least unravel the riddle that's the Ryder Cup. Enjoy.
Perfect. Take care, folks. Okay.